All right, so when you get hit with losses, a loss essentially means that the information or the data that you had going into the thing that you went into, assuming that you were expecting to win that thing, a loss means that you had the information that you had going into that thing wasn't the information or data that was needed to correctly execute and get to whatever it is that you wanted to get. So when those losses hit, if we don't sit down, not even that you need to sit down, but if we don't analyze the reason for why that loss occurred, then we're essentially ignoring the fact that we had data that wasn't correct. Like, where I was thinking, what I've been thinking with this is, I'm in the world of athletics right now, so like this is what's in the front of my mind. But a lot of times if you're an athlete that, just like from the experience that I've had, if you're an athlete that isn't that gifted just right out of the gate where you can roll out of bed and you're elite, right? In some cases, athletes get to the point where they feel like they're training hard and as well as they can. And over the course of 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, like that was the case with me, where I started training. When I was in 8th grade, really 7th or 8th grade, I started taking training seriously, and taking training seriously in the sense that I was doing it for a specific reason. Because before then, I still put a lot of time into it, and I put a lot of intention into it. What I did was very intentional, and I would be fully in that. But I started to train for a reason, starting like 7th or 8th grade. And by the time that I got to college, the original dream that I had didn't happen when I got to college, which was to play past college and to play professionally. That didn't happen. And so for that like occurrence or scenario to not have an effect on you, it's going to have an impact on you. And if you don't think it does, then you're not aware of it. Because if we think about this process, right, you have this dream or this thing that you want to do early on, and you, over the course of that time period, you put together a plan that you fully expect to elicit the result that you want. Or maybe you don't fully expect it to, but you're almost testing it to see, like, hey, can I actually get this to the point where it does elicit that result that I want? And if you get to the end of that process, the end meaning you stop moving towards that goal and you change directions. If you get to the end of that process and you haven't done the thing that you initially set out to do, that information or data is now, you've taken it and accumulated that over that given time period. And the information or data that you have is, I did everything that I knew I possibly could, and I still wasn't able to get to the point that I wanted to get to. So if we don't process that well, what that can do is then set up for the next thing, where it's like, okay, I'm either going to set my expectations much lower, because that process that I just went through, I had extremely high expectations and I didn't get to that point. So I'm going to set my expectations lower, because what I just learned from that process is not to set my expectations high. Like that could be one takeaway that we have from that. And that's like the way that I think about it, is you just take a bunch of little losses or a bunch of little cuts over the course of time. If you don't process those, then you lose that sense of enthusiasm, or you lose that sense of purpose and drive behind what it is that you're doing. And again, like, I went through this process. I'm probably still going through this process, right? There's probably still things that I'm not aware of that are a side effect of that. But I'm like working to get aware of those, to see, okay, what adjustments do I need to make to flush that, and to understand why it happened, get the correct information so I understand why it happened, and then I can move forward from there, right? But so like that's one way that we could process it, is to set your expectations lower the next time you, whatever that next thing that you're pursuing is, which if you want to have low expectations, is like, okay, that's do you, but that's not what I want to talk about. So if we don't want that to happen, then what we need to do is stay as, when you get hit with one of those little mini losses, because where the reason that it gets to the point where you're at the end and you don't get to the thing that you wanted to get to, and you take and you carry that with you, it's not like it's just one time where that happens and it's just like, oh, well, it all happened that time. It's little things that build up along the way where you probably start to believe that a little bit 5 years ago or 3 years ago or 4 years ago, right? You start to quit little by little on that thing because you're not seeing the things that you think should be elicited, and so it builds up on you over time. So if we don't want that to happen, what we do is when we get hit with one of those losses or with one of those like little mini cuts, we go in and we process that. So what does it actually mean to process something like that? My thought process behind that is, like I started this off with, the information that we had. Like, look at the information that you had going into whatever the thing is that you're going into. Like for me, it was that, okay, I can take myself and I can turn myself into a professional baseball player. That was, again, this is like 4 or 5 years ago now, but this is just the space that I'm in, so it's the example that I'm going to use. But like that was the dream or the expectation that was set. So instead of me saying like, oh, that didn't happen, so that means I should never set those expectations high again. It's every single time that you suffer a little mini loss or cut along the way, look at what went into it. Look at the data that you have going into it until you understand why that loss happened. Because there's always it can't be any other way, in the sense that if you understand all the variables that are going into the situation, going into the scenario, you're gonna be able to understand why things happen. It's just like laws. If you take a marble and you hit another marble, that second marble that you hit is going to move based on the speed at which you hit it, the density of the marble, like all these different factors that are going in. We can predict what's going to happen based on that if we know all of that information or all of that data. So the same thing is true in a given environment or a given scenario. It might be more complex with something like a human being versus a marble, because we have so much that goes into it. We have like your habitual thought processes. We have occurrences that happen to you that you're not even aware of. We have the fact that you can't remember things. Like we have all these different things that go into the environment, and it might be more complex, but that's not to say that we can't over time work to understand as many variables as we can, or all of those variables, so we understand why the output that we're getting is, like, why we're getting that output that we're getting. And if we take and we go through that process as we go through whatever it is that you're doing, it doesn't even have to be that we look at losses in that way. We also want to look at wins in that way. Because if we just look at losses and we put all of our attention there, we're probably going to end up doing more of that, right? We also want to do that with wins of like looking at, okay, what is it that I can repeat here? What is it that worked well? And are there things that I can do to make this process better, right? It's, pretty straightforward. But if we do that throughout that process and along that path or along that line, we don't get to the point where you're just like, well, what I wanted to happen didn't happen. I don't really know why, and I'm just going to kind of like ignore it or throw it to the side and just be like, yeah, it didn't happen. We know all the variables that are going in, and so either we choose to stop because, like, we actively choose to stop because there's something else that we want to pursue, or we continue on that until the thing that we want to do is accomplished or done. But it's a choice that's made, that's fully conscious on your end of it. It's not a choice that's made as a as a side effect or as a result of all those little losses built up, but it's something that you've actively processed that, and so you know what you're doing. You're kind of like determining what you're doing because of the fact that you've processed all of that as you went through it.